We had black and white targets up everywhere. We dug a hole behind home plate. The building on the outside was being done, structural reinforcements happening inside of phase 3. Off season for baseball season was construction season for us. So we had to do everything as fast as we possibly could, given the time frames that we had. We also did pre-pour scans for concrete. We did pre-pour, post-pour, checked for floor flatness, for levelness, 3,000, 3,500 scans over the life of this project that we did. Every single scan area was tied to survey control. Absolutely no way without what you guys did from a 3D coordination standpoint with that laser scan data. Today? Everybody doing good? All right. So today I do want to talk about some laser scanning and how I utilize laser scanning in 3D coordination. My name is Dwane Lindsey. I am the Architectural Applications Director for FGM Architects, based out of the suburban Chicago office. We actually have 6 offices, architectural design firm, Milwaukee, Chicago, Burbs of Chicago, St. Louis, and Austin, Texas. We mainly focus in the educational side of things, K through 12, higher ed, recreational, federal, a lot of commercial projects. I'm going to preface this presentation by saying this is not, or was not, an FGM project. Throughout my career of 25 years or so, I worked at an architecture firm. I taught Autodesk software, Revit, AutoCAD, Navis, BIM 360, the works. Then I worked at a GC company, and this is the project that I worked on. I managed and did all of the 3D coordination for a ballpark renovation on the north side of Chicago. So if you don't know what that is, you'll find out very shortly. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to take a look at what hardware and software were used, what the project history was, very, very brief project history. I don't want to get too far into the weeds. If you really want to know more about the history of this project, go on the Cubs, yes, Chicago Cubs, YouTube page. There's a video called Saving Wrigley Field. You get a lot more history on that, but I'm just going to give you a little project history of what we did here. Take a look at some of the challenges and solutions that we had, and then come up with a conclusion and a little Q&A session at the end here. So yes, we are talking about Wrigley Field on the north side of Chicago, a landlocked baseball stadium originally built in 1914. It is the second oldest ballpark in major leagues. Who's the oldest ballpark? Fenway. Here you go. So, renovating this ballpark was going to take a massive undertaking. It was built in 1914. We had essentially zero documentation is probably pretty close. You can imagine there's nothing in CAD. There is nothing in 3D. If we had plans, they're paper, they're vellums, they're legit blueprints, you know, who knows what they are, if they're even intact. So we had to really come up with a game plan for this. So what's the hardware and software that we used for this actual ballpark? We did everything with we scanned, anything we scanned, we did with a FARO 330. The X series, the GC that I worked at, we had 5 or 6 330s because we also did pre-pour scans for concrete. We did pre-pour, post-pour, we checked for floor flatness, for levelness, outside of the actual existing conditions that we were trying to achieve. We registered everything with Scene, so everything went into FARO Scene. We then pushed all that information directly to Recap Pro. So we dumped RCPs immediately out of Scene, and the cleanup of any of the scans we actually did in Recap. We had separate crews that were doing scanning. We had people at the ballpark when the scan was done, or if it was, you know, there's going to be a long scan time, they may flip cards out. We'd actually take a card, give it to somebody, they would go in and register that information in Scene. Dump that RCP so that I could get it at the end of the day. We used Recap 360. I used the mobile app actually to view the scans out in the field. I used that mobile app for making notes out in the field on the scan that would actually then show up back in Recap. So a moment of silence for Recap Pro iPad. I actually liked it. I really liked how it worked and how it melded back to the desktop. I wasn't scanning with the iPad. I wasn't taking RTC data into the iPad and registering it and all that kind of crap. I just legit used it so I could view the scan and write notes on it. The renovation of this ballpark happened roughly 6 years while the team still had to play during the summer. So we had to scan so that when we got kicked out of the ballpark 4 hours before a ball game, and a lot of games at Wrigley start at 1:20 in the afternoon, it makes for a very, very, very short time frame to go look at existing conditions during the summer. Because off-season for baseball season was construction season for us. So we had to do everything as fast as we possibly could, given the time frames that we had. Revit was utilized for phases 3.5 to 5. The first few phases were actually pretty much all AutoCAD. So I really came on board in this project after phase 3 and really started to push the 3D coordination efforts, the scanning, and those types of things in this ballpark. Because prior to that, it just didn't happen. All of our subs use AutoCAD MEP. That was their thing of choice. We did all of our coordination with Navisworks and Recap, and I'll show you that here in a little while. We used glue. I used BIM 360 glue at the time. Again, this is probably, I think we wrapped up in 2019. The project finished in 2019. So that was 17, 18, 19 are pretty much the 3 years I was out there. Used glue to look at the model when we doing installs. Hey, does this look right? Is it matching what we had to do? Just to give you an idea, we were in one area of the ballpark. We were coordinating in coordination down to a 1/4 inch. I specifically remember looking at my plumber saying, "Hey, you need to move your pipe a 1/2 inch in this model." And he looked at me like I had 4 eyes, 6 legs. He's like, "You're insane." I said, "How are you laying this out?" "Well, we got Trimble. We're gonna put all our hangers in and everything else." I said, "Okay then, move it over the 1/2 inch. Because if we don't, we're gonna get out in the field and then our fire protection guy, who's got a sloped dry system, isn't gonna fit. And now you're gonna F him up, and now we're gonna have to redo all this crap. Just move it over." That's how tight we were in a lot of these spaces. And that was actually a brand new space that we built from scratch. So now you think about how we're going to do that in the rest of the ballpark. All of our plans were distributed with Bluebeam, so every single PDF was done in Bluebeam Studio. All of the data that we utilized from a coordination standpoint went to ShareFile. All of our scans got pushed to ShareFile. So that RCP went directly into ShareFile. It then got synced back to all of our computers. So all of our subs, my computer, at the next day, I turned on my computer and it was synchronizing all that scan data. I chose only to synchronize so much scan data because towards the end of the project, we had, I think, 1.5 TB of scan data, and my hard drive was 1 TB. So yeah, I couldn't fit all that in there. But after a certain time, I didn't need, phase 3 data anymore. Although it actually came back. I needed phase 3 data in actually phase 5. So that's what we utilized to distribute all of our data. We put scan data in Navis, directly RCP files directly into Navis. We did all of that off our hard drives. I told all of our subcontractors, do not try and stream laser scan data off your network. You're on the job site, you're VPN'd into your company, do not, because you're gonna sit here for an hour waiting for that scan data to load. So everything we did was local. That way we all had the same data, we all shared the same information. That was as close to a common data environment that I've probably been at and created for this project. And that was all done through the ShareFile sync. I think it's something different now. You can use box, drop box, whatever your flavor is going to be. I think this is the word of the day. Survey control. Every scan that we did, and I don't have exact numbers, but it's around 3,000, 3,500 scans probably over the life of this project that we did. Every single scan area was tied to survey control. It didn't matter where we were in the ballpark, it didn't matter what year it happened, it was tied to survey control. We had black and white targets up everywhere. Every single one of our targets had a number on it. So that when the separate surveying company came out, we had an external surveyor come in that was pretty much at the ballpark every single day. Scanned all these targets. We then utilized that data into scene so we could align all of our data to survey control. Without that, I don't know how we would have done this. Because what happens when you use survey control is that you can get a full scan without having to transform, move, guess, eyeball, whatever you want to call it, scan data together. So we have over 5 years worth of scan data that I was able to pull into Navisworks and cut this, essentially, stadium section inside of Navis. Not once did I have to transform my scan. When we gave the scan data to the architects and the engineers, because they did use it as well, even though they'd already designed everything, we still needed to give them data because when you open up walls that you can't see into, or you open up ceilings that you can't take down during the middle of the summer because, hey, guess what? There's people that are paying a lot of money to sit in a suite, and you can't rip apart a suite just so you can see what's in the ceiling. We gave that scan data to them so they were able to utilize it. So we utilized the scan data across the entire project, but survey control, I mean, it's probably going to hear it a few more times today. Definitely utilize survey control. Now I say that being an architecture firm now that uses zero survey control. I've been with the company a little over 17 months or so. When I first said something about survey control, I got looked like, I was foreign. They had no clue who I was. They don't know what I was talking about. I was speaking a language that just wasn't even in their vocabulary. So the things that I've learned and did on this project, I'm trying to carry forward now into the design world, where let's try and do some of this information now. And we do scanning. We actually do scanning for our existing projects, especially a lot of our schools. We're going into an auditorium. We're going to renovate it. We scan it so we can get the existing conditions, we get the measurements, especially up high spaces, just being able to measure. Tying that back to a survey control, that's something that we're going to be working on. If you don't do it, I highly suggest that you do it. This project was invaluable for us to do survey control. There are spaces that weren't created when we first scanned other areas. They were done after the fact. Without survey control, there's no way we would have been able to tie that information back. There's just no way. There's no visual comparison between an existing space and a hole that we dug behind home plate. That hole wasn't there. And the part that we scanned before, that probably got renovated, now it's something different. So tying back to survey control was huge for us. So really quick, couple quick things with the phasing. Phase 1, bleachers, gone. Completely gone, and structural reinforcement happened in the grandstands. There's a thing called the F line at Wrigley Field. If you've ever been to Wrigley Field, it's the column that blocks your view when you're sitting in the lower bowl. That F line column line is 54 columns, I believe it is. That basically holds up the upper deck. And that was original columns built in 1914 that were on very shallow footings. So over the course of 3 years, micropiles were 4 micropiles per column down to bedrock, so about 100 feet, capped. Columns were then tied back to those new foundations. Basically, they lifted the ballpark, every single column. It took about 13 weeks per column. There's a video actually in the Wrigley Field YouTube video that actually shows the customized shoring tower that they use to do that. So if you're interested in that, but that was phase one. No scanning. Scanning was done because as we were lifting the ballpark, we actually scanned it and then we surveyed targets almost everywhere in that upper deck to make sure that the ballpark wasn't moving, like legit moving to a spot that was not going to be good. So we scanned it, we surveyed it, and then we utilized that scan data after the fact and surveyed it again once we got each footing down, how everything lined up. So that's what the bleachers look like. Yeah, they're pretty much gone. So in phase two, we renovated the underside of the center field stadia. Structural reinforcement still happening on the rest of the ballpark, and there's actually another building, an office building, and the locker room area that the Cubs now utilize is actually outside of the ballpark. So that was all brand new in phase two. Actually, this is the custom shoring tower that was utilized. So every F-line column, so that was done over 50 some columns, and there's a little video. I put it in here, I didn't want to spend too much time on it because I have a lot to go through. Phase three, this is where I got into it. We dug a hole behind home plate. The building on the outside was being done. We started, again, structural reinforcements happening inside of phase 3.5. Brand new hole dug behind home plate. Was never there. So that's a brand new space, and that's what it looks like. So you see a target on the back wall. You see spheres where we did some scanning. Yes, there's a sphere on the ground. We actually took a tripod, put it upside down so a scanner was upside down because we wanted to get the depth of where the the mud slab is underneath all that gravel, because that gravel is actually coming out. It was put in there because this was a temporary field office until they built it out into a high-priced fancy club. We surveyed everything. All that plumbing work in the background there, that was not modeled. That's actually drainage for the ballpark. There is a lip in the concrete that was not there in the model. So the structural model didn't have that lip in the concrete because they had to put that lip in the concrete when they built it in a previous phase because of the drainage that was utilized. And the architect didn't realize how low that plumbing was actually going to be. And there's bathrooms right underneath that. Yeah, you're getting about a 6'8" ceiling in there. They're like, no, we cannot do that. Without the scan data, there's no way we'd have been able to measure that. How do you measure off a gravel floor that isn't legit? It's not the real thing. Where do you pull a tape measure off of for that? You're gonna guess at where the gravel is? Are you trying to pull something off a wall? We have 5-foot, elevation markers on the columns, but that's not anywhere near a column. So that really helped us tremendously. Not only us as coordination, but the designers for looking at those spaces. We ended up having plumber, love them, quarter bends, eighth bends, this bend, that bend. They did everything they could to get those pipes back up. And we had to completely cap off the drains up in the stadia because they cleaned the ballpark with fire hoses. So those drain lines had to maintain, actually. So we had to do one at a time. Phase 4, this is where the big stuff happened. This is basically about 23 weeks of work, and it's about $120 million worth of work. And this is what it actually, let's see if it'll play. So this was the 7th inning stretch for you guys. If you want to stand up and stretch, you actually probably will hear a little bit of music. But this is what it looks like, 23 weeks worth of work, $120 million. After all this, after we actually re-poured the stadia, We started building clubs underneath there, and we actually scanned post-pour of the concrete to make sure there wasn't any big deviations in the concrete or anything like that. We actually built what they call a subroof, just take metal decking, put it up against the concrete so that any water that actually would penetrate would hit the subroof and go down to a drain at the field wall, actually underneath the stadium. The last time I did this presentation at AU, I actually had Harry Carey singing the 7th inning stretch during this last part here, so. But yeah, that was about 23 weeks worth of work. Cubs fans, yes, they were on this project, but guess what? They did not want them, including myself, to go to the playoffs anytime we had construction. Because that meant we went from 26 weeks to 23, maybe 22, but when they won the World Series, we didn't start construction until after that last World Series game, which was November 3rd. Opening day does not move. And we had one opening day where it snowed, but guess what? We still had to be done by opening day because we didn't know it was going to snow that day. We would have had to have like a week's worth of blizzards for us to move opening day. So we had an extremely tight timeline, as you can imagine. So the scanning, what did that actually look like? Oh, video stopped there for a second. There we go. So this is the concourse. If you can notice in the upper right-hand corner that I'm in recap, 80 some odd scans, almost 90 scans from left field to right field. We scanned the entire concourse because we had to renovate it. All of the MEPs up in that area needed to be renovated. Again, 0 existing conditions that we had to work from. We had almost 3 phases of previous work that had been done, including tying in information from the outside area. So we scanned it. This is Navisworks information put into Recap Pro. So we utilize this to help us understand, just give us a different visual than just the actual point cloud data. So this is the real view, putting in an NWD file from Navisworks to show all of our MEPs of where they were going to go against those existing conditions. This actually helped us determine in phase 4 that a massive cable tray that was supposed to stay in and come out in phase 5 needed to come out in phase 4. There were going to be like 2 lines running through that cable tray instead of the 80 that were in there now. We were able to identify, hey, we need to get this thing out of here based on all the information that we had, so that's what we did. So you can see a little bit different view. This is Navisworks point cloud data directly into Navis. We've heard over yesterday from a few different people about different applications for clash detection and automation and everything else. I can tell you right now, I didn't use a single one. We did daily coordination, an hour or 2 every single day, and we had an entire day of coordination once a week. We legit just flew through Navisworks to do all of this. We didn't really have time to create issues and track and everything else. It was basically as we fly through, hey, you need to move this, okay, do it. Hey, you need to move that, do it. Okay, who's this, who's this, who's this, who's this, who's this? Everything was done in real time, basically. So as they saved, upload the share file, sync it, refresh, we have all that data back on everybody's computer within a couple minutes. So we utilize this tremendously every single phase of the project. And this is what the final product actually looked like. So there are a lot of things in there that came out, and we knew they were coming out. So I'm going to back up a second. There's a fan coil in there. It's got a demo note on it that I made with the iPad. Again, rest in peace. But that actually came through, so we were able to see that information, and we knew that we could just blow that away. I didn't clean it up. I didn't have time to clean it up. I couldn't go through all the little parts and pieces of that concourse and clean up all of the scan data. We just said, ignore it and go. I didn't use clash detection for anything with the scan data. We did all visual clash detection. I didn't use Navisworks to clash against the cloud. I didn't use any other program. It's just what we had to do to make this thing work. The last phase, we were completely renovating all of these suites except for the very center portion that was done in phase 4. We did a major work in the right field corner, left field corner. We had an addition to the stadium. In the suite level, in phase 4, we had 7 superintendents on site because they all had different areas. And one of them said during phase 4, he goes, I thought you guys signed off on the suite level. I was like, yeah, we did like weeks ago. He goes, your coordination sucks. And I'm like, excuse me? He goes, I have to coordinate every single morning. I said, why? He goes, you got stuff hitting steel all over the place. Okay. Well, what happened was these gusset plates that are sitting there, and this is actually an image. I actually changed this image and I forgot to upload it. The fire protection shouldn't be going through the steel. That was an error on the fire protection guy. But there were gusset plates that were not in the model. So anything you see in purple here is actually in the model. And then you have the scan data. All these gusset plates weren't modeled. We couldn't see them until we could demo the suites. Okay, so now what do we do? Well, for phase 4, you got to coordinate. For phase 5, when we did the rest of them, the entire suite level, I made an agreement with the project team that said, as soon as you are done demoing and doing your abatement and then doing your structural reinforcement, because some of these gusset plates grew between 4 to 12 inches in size, and they didn't know how big they were going to be until they got through and did the assessment on the steel that was there post-demo. I'm not going to know that stuff is there. We, as soon as we possibly could, went into that suite level and scanned, which meant we were standing on metal deck that had 0 concrete on it, had 0 rebar, and we scanned that entire suite level. We then re-coordinated the suite level after we had coordinated everything else. We coordinated the entire suite level, no scan data. We went back with the scan data and re-coordinated, and were able to move pipes out of the way of these massive gusset plates that were not modeled, including fire mains and water pipes and everything else that was hitting these massive gusset plates that we didn't have. Without the scan data, no clue. That stuff was not documented anywhere. We also gutted another area in the ballpark. This is actually twofold. We were putting floor sinks, so this is becoming another club area. So we had to put sinks, floor sinks in the floor. In the model, my plumber was hitting a steel beam in the floor. So I said, okay, we can move it over a foot, it should clear it. And the guys went out in the field to mark it, to do the coring through the floor, and they go, yeah, we're hitting a steel beam. What are you talking about? How can you be hitting a steel beam? We just moved it over a foot, so you didn't hit that steel beam. They go, yeah, you got to move it back. Talked to my guys that did all the scanning, and I go, I need the scan from the underside of the Jack Daniels deck from like 3 years ago. All right, so go find that, load that in, because it was tied to survey, didn't have to worry about moving it anywhere. Came in and found out that the structural model was off compared to what the real live data was from the scan. Okay, we redid underground suite coordination because now we knew that there was error in the model and that we just turned off the model completely from a structural standpoint and just looked at the scan data. So that was below this. The other part of this area was a concession stand area. Again, we could not touch it. We couldn't remove ceiling tiles. It was hard ceiling, so we couldn't demo the ceiling. We need to see everything that's in there. There are walls here. We demo it out, and there's, 3 or 4 plumbing lines there. There's actually a gas line just to the left of that. Nobody knew that were there. Oh yeah, and by the way, they have to stay. Oh, your custom architectural wood slatted panel thingy you got going on? Yeah, that's not going to fit there anymore. We need to redesign it. This is all happening during construction. And again, if we wouldn't have scanned it, how do we know where it is? We were able to scan it and give that information back to the architects, and they were within days having us new documents, new issuances of what they're going to do inside that space. There's things in the ceiling that nobody knew was there. The plumbing lines were a lot lower than anybody expected. So that really, really tall ceiling that they wanted in there, yeah, now you're gonna drop that thing about 1.5 feet. Nobody was happy, but there was nothing we could do. The plumbing had to stay. Those traps had to stay. They couldn't take them away. That's what was really, killing everything. This is what I actually brought into Navisworks for our coordination. I didn't care about anything below. So I cleaned up in this instance, I cleaned up the point cloud to only include the information that I needed for coordination. I didn't care about anything below, anything above like 4 feet, 5 feet, that's the only thing I cared about. I actually took away the metal deck on top because I didn't need it. We just needed to know where all the drops and conduit and piping and everything was. So it just made life easier for, especially our MEP guys. They were, the bigger the point clouds in CAD, the more time they struggled. So I tried to clean that up for them as much as I could in Phase 5. And then this image is a scan image. We were adding onto the ballpark in left field, actually extending the stadium. So the fastest way to do it was to precast panels for the stadia. How do you accurately depict the exact tread length and depth and slope of a stadium that you can't see the end of? There's a wall on the end of that stadium that we couldn't take down. So we scanned it. We didn't only scan the side. Is there a laser on this thing? Hey, there's actually scan spheres on top of the stadium here. So we went on top and scanned every other couple rows so we could get the exact perforation, slope, everything of the stadium. They were able to precast the concrete, haul it out to the job site, and place it without any issues. The structural engineers took this scan data and were able to get the exact elevations of the existing steel so that they could match the new steel that was going to support the new stadia. And also a big column, massive column in this left field here. Structural engineer said, I'm really glad you guys sent us that scan data because our model had that massive column there in the corner off by 1 foot. That mattered. So just because we had model information and we were looking at the model information because that was driving the CDs, didn't necessarily mean it was correct. The real world is correct. That scan data was correct. Because we tied it to survey control, we knew that column was in the exact spot it is in the real world and that their model was off. Not to try and put blame on anybody, but that's what you have to do to understand and avoid the major issues, hopefully during construction. Unfortunately, that was the only time we had, was during construction. But we're able to do this, and if they weren't able to, because if you look at this, anybody have any idea how you would get steel elevations and the slope and accurately depict the stadia? How do you do that? You can't use tape measures for that. You use a laser device to try and measure things from what? Right? We had to scan it. So it was invaluable to do that. And everything we did on this project from a 3D coordination standpoint that included all the scan data, as much as our superintendents bitched about how long it took, and because they were flying during Phase 4, and we were coordinating while they were basically forming concrete, told me there is absolutely no way we would have been able to hit opening day without what you guys did from a 3D coordination standpoint with that laser scan data. That right there solidified everything we did on that project, regardless of how much crap I got from all these different people that said, what are you spending money on scanning for? What are you spending money? Why do we have our surveyors out here every single day, you know, because you guys are scanning, that right there, that was a mic drop moment. There's no other way this project would have been able to have been done using traditional methods. So that's what I have for today, folks. I appreciate your time. Let me speak. Matt and the entire RC team, thank you for putting on a great conference. I'll open up for questions.